The shift that changed everything in the bustling corridors of Saints Memorial Hospital in a busy American city. Nurse Sarah Willis had always been a fixture of the night shift. Known for her cool demeanor and precise manner, she'd built a reputation among her colleagues for getting the job done efficiently, if not always with a smile. But what most didn't know was that Sarah carried with her a deep, quiet prejudice, a quiet belief that certain people didn't deserve the same level of care. One late evening, a woman named Angela Williams arrived in the emergency room, clutching her side in excruciating pain. Angela, a 32-year-old black woman, had been struggling with an injury she had sustained while working a double shift at a local diner. Her breathing was shallow, and beads of sweat dotted her forehead, her face contorting as she tried to keep calm. She had been to the ER before, but not like this. Something felt off. Nurse Willis, who had just finished a 12-hour shift, sighed as she saw Angela's condition. She glanced at the clock and noticed she only had an hour left until her break. She didn't have time for this, and her instinct told her that this was just another case of a person who wasn't really in urgent need. Her gaze lingered on Angela's skin tone for just a moment too long, as if it made her assessment easier. "I'm sorry, Mom. You'll have to wait your turn," she said coldly, barely glancing up from the clipboard in her hand. Angela, her breath shaky and face pale, tried to speak but found it difficult to get the words out. "Please, I need help." "It hurts so much." Willis looked over at her with a furrowed brow, clearly irritated, before she sighed. "You people always think it's an emergency when it's really nothing serious." Before Angela could protest, Nurse Willis turned on her heel and walked away, leaving her in the waiting area to deteriorate in pain. As time passed, Angela's condition worsened. Her vision blurred, and her breathing became more erratic. She was on the verge of fainting when she heard the familiar sound of footsteps returning. But this time, it wasn't Sarah Willis. It was Dr. Marcus Davenport, the attending physician for the night shift, and he was accompanied by another nurse. Dr. Davenport, noticing Angela's pale complexion, immediately assessed the situation. He rushed to her side and began to question her about her symptoms. The nurse beside him began to prepare a bed for her, but it wasn't until Sarah Willis returned that the true drama unfolded. Upon seeing Dr. Davenport with Angela, Sarah froze. Her stomach churned when she realized that Dr. Davenport had already begun the process of administering care. She took a step forward, about to say something, but when her eyes met Angela's, she faltered. The woman before her was clearly in a dire situation, something Sarah had failed to recognize. "Dr. Davenport," Sarah stammered, trying to regain control of the situation. "This patient. She's not serious." "I don't think—" But the doctor interrupted her. "You don't think? Did you actually assess her? She's critically ill." His voice was sharp, and the air between them felt thick with tension. As Nurse Willis tried to explain herself, she was cut off by the sound of a gurney being rushed in with another patient. Angela's condition had now turned life-threatening. Dr. Davenport swiftly motioned for them to get the IV line started as he turned back to the nurse. "Sarah, I'm afraid your shift is over. You're going to need to go home early." Willis's face flushed, both from embarrassment and the realization of the depth of her mistake. She tried to argue, but the weight of her actions was sinking in. This was no longer a simple misjudgment. It was a failure of empathy. As she watched Dr. Davenport and the team work on Angela, something deep inside her shifted. She left the room, her footsteps heavy with guilt. When she reached the break room, she slumped down into a chair and let out a shaky breath. She couldn't deny the truth anymore. The prejudices she'd allowed to fester had almost cost someone their life. Worse, she had almost let it slide unnoticed, without anyone holding her accountable. The following days were a whirlwind for Nurse Willis. She faced an internal investigation, and while it didn't result in her immediate termination, she was placed on probation and required to attend sensitivity training. But the true change came when she met Angela again. Angela had come back to the hospital for a follow-up, and when Sarah spotted her in the hallway, she froze. The woman who had once been a nameless patient now held a weight in Sarah's heart. Angela's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Sarah felt the magnitude of her past ignorance. She walked over, her steps unsure but steady, and introduced herself. I'm sorry. I owe you an apology. I was wrong. And I almost cost you your life. Angela's gaze softened. I could tell, she said quietly. But I'm not the only one you need to apologize to. There are others. And maybe you could make a change, not just for me, but for everyone else who comes through those doors. That conversation was the beginning of something bigger. Nurse Willis went through extensive training, and over the course of months, she began to change. She didn't just learn about cultural competency, but about empathy, humility, and the importance of understanding the humanity in every patient, regardless of their background. By the time Angela came back for a final checkup, Nurse Willis was a different person. She was no longer the nurse who turned a blind eye, but someone who truly cared for her patients. And when Angela left the hospital for the last time, she turned to Nurse Willis and said, "You've come a long way. I'm proud of you." The story of Sarah Willis, the nurse who learned the hard way, spread throughout the hospital, a reminder that change, no matter how difficult, is always possible. And it all started with one moment of realization. It was a shift that had changed everything.